sociologist of religion, and I study how religion and beliefs and values and culture are changing, and I've particularly been studying that in this country in most intensity for quite some time, using a mix of methods, including surveys, big national surveys, and a lot of interviews and ethnographic work, so it's a mixed methods presentation. So I've pulled out some, for this purpose, I've pulled out some conclusions about what's happening to rituals around death. My overall perspective is that we're living through a time of extremely significant and rapid cultural religious change in this country. And the way that that is signalised most clearly at the moment is that the proportion of people who say they have no religion has just, in the last couple of years, overtaken the number who say they're Christian. So in that sense, for the first time in well over 1,000 years, we are moving from being a Christian country to being a no-religion country. But no religion doesn't mean secular, because an awful lot of people who say they have no religion are not secular. Atheists are a minority of those who say they have no religion, and they're a very diverse bunch, the no-religion bunch, and a lot of things are going on. So, overall picture, a time of really rapid change. So what does it mean about death? And this is an area where we can see, it's a nice little parable of how big some of the changes are. So I'm going to focus particularly on the changing rituals around death. You're stuck on the screen.
All right, I can see it.
Thank you. So quick definition of ritual. Some of you are very expert in this already. This is how I understand ritual. This is my interpretation. As you know, there's a huge body of ritual theory in a number of disciplines, and this is what I take from it and how I understand ritual. Ritual is a patterning of bodily actions. I think of it like a cocoon. Think about entering into a cocoon. So you go from one state into a cocoon state, a different state. What happens in the cocoon is a patterning of bodily actions. Ritual always involves the body. We've always thought that. So that raises a really interesting question for whether you can actually have digital ritual. So a patterning of bodily actions, along with the use of symbols, which, and this is its purposes, what it does anyway, it focuses. Ritual is a focusing lens. It singles things out. If you're having a wedding, for example, it singles out a couple, two people who are getting married, and the whole event is to focus on them and what's happening to them. It singles things out, it stabilizes them, it dignifies them, it acts as a focusing lens. Secondly, ritual connects the people involved. And more widely. So it makes the participants and the officiants part of a whole bigger picture. So if you get something, you might say, why bother getting married? You know, we love each other anyway, we're committed to each other, what's the point? And of course more people do say that these days. But those who think there's a point is it connects you to a bigger whole. It connects you to a long tradition, it connects you to the people you invite, it connects you through the legal system into society, and you will get social recognition. So rituals connect in all sorts of different ways, make something bigger, makes the private public and the public private. Thirdly, rituals are world-making. This is a cultural construction point. Our worlds aren't given to us, we make them through our cultural actions, and ritual is absolutely central. Some people like Rappaport would say the most central human activity in actually making our species what it is. Through ritual, we give a framework of meaning to our lives. And the best ritual is ritual that people don't even know they're doing, because it's so taken for granted, like sitting down in this conference. This is a ritual event, but we know the rules so well, we don't think it's a ritual. Of course it's a ritual. It sets what you can do, what you can't do, what the emotional tones are, who's in power, who's connected, whatever, whatever. The best rituals people don't call rituals, they don't even notice. So that's what ritual does, in my view. That's how I'm using the word. What's happening to death rituals? There's a very clear revolution in what's happening to funerals. Here's a question I asked in a survey just before December. It's a nationally representative survey. and you can see that basically only a quarter of people now want religious, and that's usually Christian. This man follows me right around campus. There he is. It's a religious funeral. Used to be the norm until the 70s, 80s. It would have been overwhelmingly, 80, 90% more probably. So this is a very, very recent and swift change. Funerals were just Christian funerals in this country. I wouldn't even think about it. Now suddenly they're not. And something really interesting has happened. The no-religion people, not surprisingly, want a non-religious funeral. You can say no religion is a negative category, it's an empty category, but actually there are groups like the British Humanist Association and other Green Pews and civil celebrants who offer no religion funerals who've now made it a positive identity. So the undertaker will offer you all, if you have had this experience, do you want a religious or a non-religious funeral? And that is completely understood now. Very, very swift cultural change, and over a third of people wanting that, and another quarter roughly wanting a mixture, a more tailor-made mix of religious and non-religious. This points out not all no-religious people don't like religion, but they want to do it their way. So what's happening? That's just, funerals are only one aspect of death rituals, about the disposal of the body. There are also rituals about what happens thereafter. But funerals, something big is changing. Overall, I think we're seeing not the decline of ritual at the moment, but an explosion of re-ritualisation, of creativity, of reinvention. Douglas Davis, the anthropologist of death at Durham, says that Britain is the world's leading ritual innovator. It does things, it changes its rituals. Britain is brilliant at rituals. It's one of the world's great ritual suppliers. Japan is probably the next best one. You need an empire, a monarchy, a small island, and light and dressing up. So we're great at ritual, but we're very good at changing it very quickly. For example, we shifted from burial to cremation much more quickly than most countries, and an awful lot, like Scandinavia, say, haven't shifted at all in the same way. So we're seeing it even more intensely than elsewhere. Quick sort of run through let's differentiate public death rituals from and mourning rituals from private ones. Public ones, I hope I'm not saying what Avril already said. Okay, right. Hillsborough disaster is often seen by many people as quite a turning point because religion lost hold of it. Not completely. The churches were there and did in the end. This is the Great Hill disaster where so many people were killed, so many of the spectators, in a terrible tragedy. And here's the beginning of this public bringing of flowers, tying of scarves. This happened without being orchestrated by the churches, but the churches came in afterwards and performed the official memorial services. But it saw the kind of breaking out of the religious control thing. Even more strikingly, in '97, the death of Diana saw the same thing, but kind of magnified. And the church is not present at all until the actual funeral. This is the mourning time. Someone called it a congregation without a church, all the people there milling around. And there was a lot of ritual invention, like throwing the flowers on the funeral car. That's a new thing in Britain, but it happened kind of spontaneously with many, many people. Death, the memorialisation, graves, I love going around graveyards. This has been happening now for quite some time. This mixing up, it's a deregulation, and people, so I'm moving to private now. The mixing up of religious and non-religious symbols. So on this one, there's a Tottenham Hotspur flag, there's a crucifix and a rosary, probably a Catholic grave, obviously a brand, Stella Artois bottle. It's very common to see brands now in funerals, in flower arrangements. Lucky heather, a lantern, and the traditional flowery thing. So people doing it their own way. Lots of symbolic invention and even theological invention. This is J. Goody's funeral, where the symbol of the angel is becoming really, really important in a lot of around death and in death rituals. Here's an angel tribute to Jade. and tributes to Jade said, she is now an angel in heaven. This is a new theology. It's not a Christian theology, even though angels come from Christian theology. Christianity's always been rather vague about what happens to you between dying and the next stage, the next life. Tony Walter's written a brilliant, in Bath, has written a brilliant paper on this, on how people have invented a whole new kind of cosmology to explain, particularly to children, what's happened to their parents and where they are. That they are now an angel and that they may reappear. So a lot of very creative thinking, as well as new symbolic work. And the angel thing, this is just from the graveyard down the road here in Lancaster, next to where I live, in memory of our little angel. It's now, there are easily available commercialised markers like that you can use. What happens with ashes is changing very rapidly. They can be tattooed into your body. This is somebody, they've tattooed the ashes into the body, made into carbon and rings and so on. Often now, first of all, the body used to be buried, then the ashes were buried in an urn, rather like the body, on the same sort of lines. And then you've got a kind of pluralisation of practices. And partly what's happening now is people often do, not often, some people do lots of things with the ashes, not one thing. So you do one thing with one bit, somebody has another bit. They're not all contained together. Dispersed through the relationships, I suppose, around people. Avril's done a lot of work around this area and leads the field in this. I've learnt a lot from her work and have looked at other practices like cairns, creating cairns, prayer cairns, where you put a stone in memorialisation, which I also think is a lovely symbol, as Avril says, of doing something on your own together. It's both very personal and it's communal. Because you're not there in the same like funeral together, but you just go on your own if you want, solitary, but you're together building something up. So there's a stone from many, many different people there. Shrines. This is Grace and Perry's wonderful shrine for an Essex woman. But shrines are being the body as a relic, as a sacred object. The bodies of saints are being, cathedrals are all at the moment rediscovering their relics, rediscovering that they had a saint and their body, opening up their shrines and seeing a new kind of pilgrimage. Even Richard III, people were surprised at just how many want to be near a body and sense its kind of sacred presence. And this is a shrine to an ordinary person expressed through art. The role of art is increasing and really interesting. Art is the new ritual. Artists are taking over the role of organised religion in producing not just personal but huge public displays. 5 million people went to see the poppies around the Tower of London, memorialising those who died in World War I. And the digital was very apparent here. You could buy poppies online, donate that way, have them planted in your behalf. So everyone was making that ritual, that adding to the symbols, and then you got it sent back to you to keep once the display was dissolved. And interestingly, there was a big controversy about whether to keep that display, because people loved it, or whether it should just be temporary, and people agreed it should be a temporary thing. So just to kind of try and analyse that a little bit. When do I finish my meeting?
You've got time.
How long?
What about
15? Before the discussion? Oh, good. Right. So, I can go a bit slower. Deregulation. What's going on? I'm trying to characterise the nature of the change that we are seeing. I just gave you a quick run through the pictures. First thing I think to explain why this change is happening is that there has been a deregulation. So the authorities that used to control and orchestrate rituals and rituals around death have lost their power to do so. Clearly the churches are increasingly losing their power to say, we're the only ones who can provide funerals, we're the experts, and there really is no choice. So the churches are losing their power to regulate ritual. Secondly, the civil authorities are losing their power. A lot of graveyards and crematories are civil, not ecclesiastical. They're run by the Metropolitan Authority, and they've also lost their authority to control what goes on. Here's a lovely example, again from the graveyard down the road here, which always makes me laugh. If you can see that, it says, in order to keep the Garden of Remembrance neat and tidy and allow effective grass cutting to take place, staff have been instructed to remove any additional memorialisation, e.g. plant pots, vases, solar lights, etc. We would appreciate your help in maintaining this standard. Well, this isn't actually Lancaster, but it's what's happening to graveyards. And Lancaster's not far off that in some parts of it. They just couldn't. That notice is completely ineffective. They tried really hard, but they've given up now. People just do their own thing, and it's uncontrollable. It's really a bit out of control. Sometimes they go round and clear stuff up and throw it away, but people are outraged, of course, because that's their grave. So it becomes harder and harder to do that. There's also a deregulation of knowledge and symbols, and this is where the digital really comes in. The great elite cultural institutions of the church and educational establishments, colleges and universities, but particularly universities, the dons and the clergy were the great cultural controllers. We've all lost control of knowledge and symbols now. They float freely, and that's absolutely about the digital explosion. That is the simple cause of that. So people can find out online how to conduct a ritual. They can see what other people are doing. They can see that maybe a Buddhist mandala would be a wonderful way of dealing with death. I was just talking to some teachers the other day, and they take, primary school teachers, they take their pupils to a hospice to learn about death, and to make that not an overwhelming experience, they prepare them with a Buddhist mandala. This is just an English white school, to give them a framework to understand death as well as Buddhism. It's part of their religion education, and they understand the hospice in relation to Buddhism and Buddhism in relation to the hospital, and the Buddhist idea of suffering and death and so on. So anyone can do these things and pick these symbols. That they're not within the control of small professional groups anymore. And the sharing of ideas online is a massive driver of ritual change. So deregulation, first point. Second point, autonomy and the decline of deference. Obviously that's linked up with the other side of the coin of deregulation. But these are obvious points, we are used to having voice and choice now. We live in democracy, where we choose who's in power over us. We are expected, we feel entitled to, we expect to have voice and choice. Our educational system is child-centred, student-centred. Right from the start, children are socialised to believe they have a voice and a right to say yes or no and make some decisions, and that carries through very strongly into the rest of our life. So why would we want to accept that even in death, someone else is going to prescribe how the rituals are carried out? So people expect more choice and freedom around death. Not just their own, but when they're curating the death of others as up. And that means there are new ritual providers, there are new ritual agents now. I've just mentioned the artists having a really important role now. The other kind of paid big public providers include a lot of people with a theatre background. Keep coming across people who are trained in stage design or theatrical design. A lot of people with a marketing background, including what's it called? It's got a name, like the kind of Steve Jobs thing, where you stage a new product. Some of those people go into providing rituals as well. Some are ex-clergy. There are quite a lot of ex-clergy, and the largest of all, for personal rituals, there are a huge number of Anglican women in England. Women who are members of the Church of England, but the Church of England wouldn't let lay women conduct funerals and ceremonies. So they have been trained now by things like the Civil Celebrants and other groups, or do it freelance, and they will offer you can just Google, people will offer you various rituals. And us, increasingly people feel empowered to do their own, do it yourself. Some people want an enabler and helper, some do it themselves. Then personalisation, the marking of the uniqueness of individuals, albeit individuals in relation to others. It doesn't have to be the atomistic individual. We want and expect things to be personalised. The old Christian funeral was completely impersonal, if any of you have been to it. It's a very beautiful service, but it's about the body comes, it's about the resurrection and life, the body being moved to God, their name will be mentioned. That was it, just the name. It's the standard ritual for everybody, because everybody is equal. Quaker graveyards, if you ever go to them, every gravestone is absolutely identical. You can't tell them apart at all except for the name, because everyone is equal. But we don't like equality in that sense. We want our uniqueness to be marked now. You can see that on what's happened to the grave decoration. You can also see, I think it's part of the reason why bodies and bones are becoming much more important again. The whole ideal in the kind of high modern period, 20th century up to the 80s, of cremation was about, oh, dead bodies are horrible, they're unhygienic, and we want to get rid of them as quickly as possible. Now there's a big reaction against that, wanting to have the body, open coffins, have them back in the home before burial. The ashes thing, keeping part of the body with you. Interest in the actual bones and what happens to them. And I think partly this is tied up with, what makes us individual is very much our distinct physicality as well as other things. These things go together. This is a question I asked a few months ago just to see what people value about. What do I think the point of funerals is? Quite interesting to see how they rank it. They had 5 choices. That's the UK as a whole. It differs a bit by age, but not hugely. It's surprisingly not that much difference by age, class, education, any of the things you might look for. Something in which we're pretty united, even in different demographic groups. Fourth explanation, the way that sociality has changed from, you're not born into an ascribed community which receives you. We have to create our own communities. So I call it network. It's work to make your social group, and social media is a very important part of that work. You create your friends and family now through your labour online in social media. So it's an achieved community in that sense. This makes ritual more important because ritual becomes one of the key places where we make our networks. And I think the key ritual for this is parties. Parties have become more common, bigger, lots of fireworks. Why? And rituals like weddings have got bigger and bigger and bigger. Because you're making your network there, you're solidifying your network. It's the connecting element of ritual. There's a problem though, because we all have multiple networks now, not just your local community and family. Lots of different networks. Again, the digital enables that. But when someone dies, there are these very separate networks who don't know each other at all for many people. Like a student who dies, they've got their student friends here and their family back in Japan or wherever it might be. Completely separate worlds. And as you get older, you have more separate worlds. So this is a problem for ritual providers of how they manage to link together all those networks effectively. And you might have an online memorialisation space, but that will only get one of the group. So can you have a ritual event where all come? There are some interesting examples, but I haven't got time to talk about them. Okay, the occasional one-off. Graves used to be permanent. The idea was you'd have them in a church because it'll be there forever. No one's going to buy it or sell it off. There will be a stone made out of the hardest kind of stone you can possibly have, granite in this country, so that it doesn't decay. And it's permanent. It's a permanent marker of a transient life, I suppose. We're not really so keen on that idea now. Things like woodland burial appeal to people because they're temporary and you're recycled back. A lot of rituals, instead of being the same ritual every week, like a Christian communion service, people want a one-off one for a special event. They want a bespoke one. And even memorialisation of graves in something like Marion Bauman's shown in Glastonbury in the spiritual field. People now put temporary graves for the 1 week of the Glastonbury Festival. Doesn't matter that they won't be there again, because that's the key network you want to reach, the people who will be at the festival. There's a problem here. It can be very, very open-ended. Rituals always have closure. It's a cocoon. A lot of people have told me, talking to people who use online memorialisation, they might set up a Facebook page for somebody who's died. It's really great for a while, but how can you stop it? And it becomes a terrible burden to them, because they don't want to upset people. They can't maintain it forever. There's no kind of closure that you get with a proper ritual, and that's the problem with the digital. It doesn't disappear. It hasn't got neat boundaries like rituals can. And finally, we're also living through a changing meta-narratives from the Christian one to this is, clergy tell me, this is now one of the most commonly requested and used of things that people say at funerals. You probably know it. But it's extremely telling, I think, of a very powerful new meta-narrative, which isn't that there's a God and we die and we go back to him. It's that there is a kind of cosmic wholeness. We're part of it. We should live our life now, and then we return to it. So you do die, but you're kind of recycled in the whole, in the cosmic whole. You're there in the rain and so on. So that's a shift from a theistic to a more individualistic, can have an individual slant or a cosmic one. That's a spectrum that it goes along. Green burial is growing, but it's still a very small proportion of the overall burial. So finally, I tried to do a diagram. It's nowhere near as good as the last speaker's beautiful pattern. So I think a lot of what we're seeing is about people securing significance, is the phrase that I've started to use. The rituals, death rituals and others are used to secure significance in the conditions of our lives, which are highly mobile and digitised and have more opportunities and more risks and fragilities attached to them. And death rituals, I'll be talking about the ways in which they can anchor. There's a whole new creative, artistic element opening up to new perspectives and creativity and unique kinds of rituals. And they're not just about securing individual identity, though they often are. They're also about how you relate through those rituals. So you're securing cognitive, relational, metaphysical and other sorts of significance by way of these rituals.